Have you ever heard of love so perfect it becomes a lie? For most, love is a bond, a promise. For some, it's a fragile thread, easy to fray. But for Samuel Blake, it became a crime scene. The discovery of a lingerie, a set of $600 emerald-studded lingerie, was all the proof Samuel Blake needed to murder his newly wedded wife, Diana Harper, on the night of their honeymoon. The night began like a dream for the newlyweds. Samuel Blake, a 32-year-old architect, had married the love of his life, Diana Harper, a gorgeous 29-year-old marketing executive. She was the sun in his otherwise gray world, and he'd spent every waking moment marveling at how lucky he was to call her his. It was the night after their wedding. Their honeymoon suite was the pinnacle of luxury, a cliffside villa overlooking a small lake. The interior was simply exquisite, with candles flickering against the soft hum of ocean waves. It was supposed to be a night to remember, a celebration of their union. But by dawn, Diana's lifeless body would be sprawled on the stretcher as the officers removed her from the crime scene.
A warm welcome to True Family Crime Stories. To our loyal subscribers and viewers, we're deeply thankful for your unwavering support and trust in our content. Your subscription means the world to us, and we're honored that you've chosen to join our community. We look forward to continuing to share compelling, thought-provoking, and informative content with you in the future.
Looking back, Samuel had never been the jealous type. In their 3 years together, he had trusted Diana implicitly. She was everything he wasn't. She was bold, spontaneous, and magnetic. He often joked that she could light up a room simply by walking into it. What then could lead to a man like Samuel, who was so loving and kind, so affectionate and obsessed with his new wife, to commit murder? Perhaps a recap of Samuel Blake's life will convince us that something so perfect and exciting could lead to a gruesome murder. Samuel Blake and Diana Harper were the embodiment of a modern fairy tale. Their love story was the kind that drew admiration from friends and strangers alike. It was a story of passion that seemed almost too perfect to be real. Samuel was an architect, a quiet, meticulous man whose life revolved around his career. He wasn't much into the dating scene, and many often joked that he would end up old and lonely. At 32, he had carved out a respectable career designing sleek, high-class and practical buildings all over the city. Diana was his opposite in nearly every way. At 29, she was a marketing executive with a flair for the dramatic. Her laughter could light up the dimmest room, her energy drawing people toward her like moths to a flame. She thrived in social gatherings and the spotlight. As a woman at the peak of her career, she was well respected, and she loved the attention. Diana's personality was a stark contrast to Samuel's calm demeanor. Their paths crossed at a charity gala, a glitzy event that Samuel hadn't wanted to attend but had to, for business sake. Samuel had been coerced by a persistent colleague, while Diana was there representing her company. The two found themselves at the bar. "What's a guy like you doing in a place like this?" Diana had asked, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Samuel had chuckled, a rare break from his usual reserved smile. "Enduring small talk and overpriced cocktails. You?" "Networking, or pretending to, anyway." She'd grinned, tilting her glass toward his. "Here's to surviving." Their connection was instant, a magnetic pull that neither could ignore. Diana was drawn to Samuel's quiet strength, the way he seemed so grounded in a world that he wasn't familiar with. Samuel, in turn, was captivated by Diana's vibrancy, her ability to find joy in even the most mundane moments. Their first date was a whirlwind, dinner at a cozy Italian restaurant followed by a long walk through the city. Samuel found himself talking more than he ever had before, sharing his dreams and insecurities with a woman who listened intently, her eyes never leaving his. Diana, for her part, felt an uncharacteristic sense of calm in his presence, as though she'd finally found someone who truly understood her. As the months turned into years, their lives began to intertwine. They were so different, yet they complemented each other perfectly. Their love story unfolded in a series of small, beautiful moments. Lazy Sunday mornings spent in bed, Diana teasing Samuel for his obsession with perfectly folded laundry. Samuel indulged Diana's love for dramatic performances, despite his preference for quieter activities. Long road trips where they argued over playlists, only to end up laughing and singing along to whatever song happened to be playing. Their friends often joked that they were the perfect couple. "You two are like yin and yang," Diana's best friend Emily once said. "It's disgusting how well you fit together." Samuel would smile at comments like these, his heart swelling with pride. He knew how lucky he was to have Diana, a woman who had turned his world upside down in the best possible way. But love, as perfect as it seemed, wasn't without its challenges. Diana's career was demanding, requiring late nights and frequent travel. Samuel sometimes struggled with her absences, his mind drifting to worst-case scenarios. He never voiced these concerns, not wanting to seem insecure or controlling. Diana, in turn, worried that Samuel's introverted nature meant he wasn't truly happy with her outgoing lifestyle. Yet, they always found their way back to each other. Their fights were rare, but the makeups were just as passionate, filled with heartfelt apologies and promises to do better. When Samuel proposed, it wasn't an elaborate affair. He wasn't one for grand gestures, and Diana didn't need one. They were sitting on the floor of her living room, surrounded by takeout containers and half-empty wine glasses, when he pulled out a small velvet box, and Diana happily said yes. Their engagement was full of excitement. Diana threw herself into wedding planning with her usual enthusiasm. The ceremony was a dream event, held in a sunlit garden surrounded by their closest friends and family. As they exchanged vows, Samuel couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come. Diana was his everything, the person who had turned his once monotonous life into something extraordinary. Their honeymoon was meant to be the cherry on top of their love story, a week of bliss in a secluded villa, far away from the demands of their everyday lives. Samuel had spared no expense, wanting to give Diana the perfect start to their new life together. But perfection is a fragile thing, easily shattered by the unexpected. Samuel could never have imagined how quickly their dream would turn into a nightmare. The discovery of the lingerie, a set of $600 emerald-studded lingerie, was all the proof Samuel Blake needed to murder his newly wedded wife, Diana Harper, on the night of their honeymoon. Samuel had always believed that love was sacred. It was the bond that held the world together, the force that made life worth living. He'd given Diana his heart, his soul, and in return he'd believed she'd do the same. But nothing could prepare him for the betrayal he felt as he opened that fancy gift box. Samuel loved Diana with a devotion that left him vulnerable. The betrayal was more than just an act of infidelity. It was an assault on his very belief in what love could be. To know that the woman who had promised to cherish him in sickness and in health had instead given herself to someone else broke him in ways words couldn't describe. In the end, it wasn't just about revenge. It was about ending the pain. The unbearable pain in his broken heart, the love that had turned to ash in his mouth. Perhaps he had no other option. Perhaps this was his way of escaping a reality that had shattered, of making the world stop spinning for just a moment. The evening of the murder had begun perfectly. Samuel and Diana arrived at the beach house perched on the edge of the cliffs, overlooking the lake below. The vacation home was everything they had imagined, a perfect blend of luxury and comfort, secluded enough to allow the couple to bask in privacy, yet close enough to the town to feel connected to the world. Samuel, still riding the high of their wedding day, turned to Diana with a smile. She looked as radiant as she had in her wedding dress, her eyes sparkling, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Can you believe this place?" he asked, his voice filled with awe as he took in the view of the lake from their private deck. "We'll spend a whole week here." Diana smiled, but it was a little tight. "Perhaps a week is too long. I have to get back to work sooner than you think." Samuel smiled and pulled her flush against him, kissing her lips tenderly. "You work too much, darling. Allow yourself to rest. It's your honeymoon." Diana nodded and shrugged. "I'm so glad we're finally here." They had no agenda, no deadlines, no responsibilities for the next few days. Just the two of them, alone in their little paradise. They set their bags down and immediately began unpacking. The boxes they had received during the wedding were scattered around the living room, and Diana eagerly began to open them. They had received piles of gifts from family and friends and the church. The newlyweds had a small heap of gifts. They pulled out various items, beautiful linens, a new set of glasses, some tasteful decorative pieces for their home, and cakes and cookies. Diana threw her head back in laughter as she continued to unbox. Samuel couldn't help but smile at the sight of her. She was his wife, his love. He couldn't imagine a world where that would change. But little did he know that she wouldn't be alive by the next sunrise. As they continued to unpack, the sound of rain began to softly tap on the roof. The first few drops were light, but soon the drizzle turned into a steady rain, tapping against the windows rhythmically. Diana looked over at the clock and then at her reflection in the glass. "I think I'm going to wash my makeup off and take a shower," she said, glancing over at Samuel. "I'll be right back." "Take your time, I have you for the rest of tonight," Samuel replied with a charming wink. Diana laughed and kissed his cheek as she moved away. Diana disappeared into the bathroom, and Samuel turned his attention back to the boxes strewn across the living room. He smiled as he carefully unwrapped each gift, savoring the moment. He trusted her completely. They had no secrets between them. She was his everything, and he was hers. But that night his gaze fell on a box he hadn't noticed before. A box that would change everything. It was tucked behind a few other gifts, its packaging more intricate and fancier than the others. The cardboard was stiff, the design was beautiful, decorated with delicate gleaming stones that sparkled even in the dim light of the room. It looked almost too fancy to be a gift from any of their family or friends. There was no name on the box, no identifying marks to indicate who had sent it. Samuel's heart began to beat a little faster, and he felt a twinge of nervous excitement. A gift this exquisite couldn't be from just anyone. Maybe it was something special, something Diana had chosen for him, or perhaps something from a surprise guest. He set the box down on the coffee table and began carefully undoing the ribbon. When the last piece of wrapping was finally removed, Samuel paused for a moment. Inside the box, nestled in a velvet lining, was a piece of emerald-studded lingerie with the price tag of $600. His heart skipped a beat as he ran his fingers over the material. It was beautiful, no doubt about it. But it was so expensive, Samuel couldn't help but wonder who could afford such luxury for a piece of lingerie. He wanted to believe that Diana's friends had gifted her this luxurious piece, but he had his doubts. $600 was a lot of money. His fingers traced the edges of the fabric as he admired it with a smile, and that's when he noticed the envelope. It was tucked neatly inside the folds, almost as if it had been placed there deliberately. His eyes scanned the room. Diana was still in the bathroom. The sound of the rain pattering against the windows was the only noise in the room. Samuel hesitated for a moment, but curiosity won out. He reached for the envelope, carefully sliding it out from where it had been hidden. The letter inside was simple, the handwriting elegant and familiar. It wasn't from Diana, but from someone he knew very well. Samuel's stomach dropped as he began to read. Diana, you were breathtaking last night. I still can't believe you went through with this, but I don't regret a thing. This doesn't change us. The lingerie is my way of saying thank you for everything you've given me, your time, your body, your heart, and our child. I know you're with him now, but you and our unborn child will always belong to me. I can't wait for next weekend to come. Samuel's breath caught in his throat. The life he thought he knew was no longer real. The love he had given, the trust he had placed in Diana, had all been shattered in this single cruel moment. Samuel was dismayed. He blamed himself for opening that box. Maybe all he had to do was leave this box for your wife to open. Maybe then he would have lived in blissful ignorance and the world would have stayed perfect. But now the truth was in his hands. Samuel's eyes remained fixed on the letter as the initial shock began to fade, replaced by a slow, burning realization. The letters, R.S., burned into his mind. He knew those initials. Richard Sanders, Diana's boss. The man had been in their lives for years now, an ever-present figure in Diana's professional world. He had shaken Samuel's hand a few times, exchanged pleasantries at company events, and shared business conversations. The two men had never been close, but there had always been a mutual respect. Samuel had never once suspected anything between them. Diana was devoted to her work, and Samuel admired her for it. He had never questioned it, never thought twice about the late nights, the emergency business trips that often seemed to pull her away from him, or her sudden and frequent promotion over the years. She was a hard worker, loyal and honest, or so he had believed. But now, with those initials burned into his mind, the truth came crashing down on him. How could he have been so blind? The signs had been there all along, the long hours, the private conversations she had with Richard, but Samuel had refused to see it. He had refused to question her, to doubt her. After all, she was soon to be his wife, his Diana, the woman he had trusted with everything. He never thought that something this huge could get past him, but now, as he stared at the letter in his hands, he knew he had been a fool. Richard Sanders. She wasn't just sleeping with him. She was carrying his child. It was all so clear now. All those late nights when she'd come home with a certain look in her eyes, the way she'd distance herself from him after returning from one of those trips. She wasn't just working late. She had been with him, and now she was pregnant. Pregnant with his child. Samuel's blood boiled at the thought. A surge of anger flooded him, rage that burned hotter than anything he had ever felt before. He wanted to scream, to rage against the unfairness of it all. He had been made a fool of, and Diana had taken everything from him. Without thinking, Samuel stormed toward the bathroom. His footsteps were heavy on the wooden floor as he approached the door. He swung it open with a force, and there she was, his wife sitting in the bathtub, her body submerged in the warm water. The sight of her, so innocent and vulnerable in that moment, made the rage inside him burn hotter. "Diana," he spat. His voice was cold. "We need to talk." She looked up at him, startled, her eyes wide in confusion. "What's wrong, Samuel?" "Richard Sanders." That was all he said, and Diana's eyes widened. "What about my boss?" she asked, trying to feign innocence. Samuel stepped closer, his fists clenched at his sides. "I know about you and Richard. I know what's been going on between you two. And I know about the baby." Diana recoiled, her face pale, her lips parting in shock. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, trying to back away from the truth. "You don't know what you're saying. You're wrong." Samuel's rage only deepened at her denial. He reached for the box, grabbed the lingerie, and flung it at her, the delicate fabric landing in the water with a soft splash. "Not just anyone buys lingerie worth $600, Diana. And don't even try to deny it. You've been sleeping with him, haven't you? You've been sleeping with Richard Sanders this whole time, haven't you?" Her eyes darted to the lingerie, and then back to him, guilt flooding her features. She bit her lip, and Samuel saw the truth in her eyes, even if she tried to mask it. She had nowhere to hide anymore. She didn't answer right away, but her hands slowly moved to her stomach, as if to protect the secret she had been carrying for so long. That small, involuntary gesture was all the confirmation Samuel needed. His chest tightened and his fists shook at his sides. The woman he had loved, the woman he had built his life with, had betrayed him in the most cruel, unforgivable way. It took just a fraction of a second for Diana's face to harden. She didn't apologize, she didn't deny it, and the next thing she said sealed her fate that night. "Well, if you're not comfortable with it, maybe we should get a divorce," she snapped. At that moment, something inside Samuel snapped. He couldn't bear the thought of her dismissing everything they had built, everything they had shared. He couldn't let her hurt him like this. He rushed toward her, his hands grabbing her by the shoulders as she tried to push him away. She thrashed in the water, struggling to break free, but Samuel was stronger. His grip tightened, his hands wrapping around her neck. Her eyes widened in fear, her mouth opening in a scream, but no sound came. She kicked and thrashed, her hands clawing at his, but he didn't let go. She was drowning in the tub, her airflow cut off, her voice turning purple. The last thing he saw before she fell still was her eyes, wide with fear, pleading for mercy that he couldn't give. The room was silent, save for the sound of the rain, now pouring heavily against the windows. Samuel's breathing was shallow, his body trembling with the aftermath of what he had done. But even as he stood there, staring down at his wife's lifeless body, he couldn't bring himself to feel regret. It was only when he heard a door open behind him that he turned to find Sharon, Diana's sister, standing in the doorway. She had come to drop off Diana's house keys, but when she saw the scene before her, her face twisted in horror. "Diana, no!" Sharon screamed as she saw the naked, lifeless form of her sister in the tub. But Samuel didn't move. He didn't run. He didn't try to escape. He knew it was over. His life, the life he had known, was over. The police arrived shortly after Sharon fled, their sirens loud in the night as they stormed into the house. Samuel barely acknowledged their presence. He had no intention of running, no plan to escape the consequences of his actions. He knew this life had ended the moment he wrapped his hands around Diana's throat. He had destroyed everything, the woman he loved, his own future, his very soul. The officers didn't need much convincing. The evidence was clear. Diana's body, still submerged in the bathtub, her face frozen in terror, was all the proof they needed. Samuel's fingerprints were all over her skin, and the lingerie box he had found earlier, with its telltale initials, sealed his fate. There was no mistaking it. The rage he had felt, the betrayal he had discovered, all led to this act of violence that could never be undone. As the police cuffed him and led him out of the house, he didn't fight. He didn't scream. He didn't beg for mercy. He knew deep down that he deserved none. There was no justification for what he had done, no excuse, no redemption. He had let his anger blind him, had let the devastation of the betrayal destroy him from the inside out. And now his life was over. The trial was swift. Samuel was found guilty of first-degree murder, sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He felt nothing, not regret, not sorrow, not even the slightest hint of remorse. What could he feel? His world had collapsed in a single night, and there was nothing left to hold on to. Samuel never truly understood how it had come to this. How something as simple as a box, something so ordinary, so unremarkable, could tear apart the life he had built, the trust he had placed in Diana. Love, no matter how strong, could be broken, and once broken, it could never be the same again. Samuel's love for Diana had been pure, but it had been poisoned by her lies, her betrayal, and in the end, it had consumed them both. What started as a dream two people deeply in love, embarking on their new life together, ended in the most tragic of ways. Samuel Blake's world was torn apart by a single moment of betrayal, and in his blind rage, he committed an unforgivable crime. The love that once seemed so perfect quickly became poisoned, and in the end it cost him everything. But let's be clear. No amount of betrayal justifies violence. There is no excuse for what Samuel did to Diana. No matter how deeply someone is hurt, there is never a reason to take another's life. The heartache, the anger, the shock, none of it should ever lead to something as horrific as murder. In the end, Samuel didn't just lose Diana, he lost himself. His life as he knew it was over the moment he let his emotions drive him to commit such an irreversible act. This case is a reminder of just how fragile trust is, and how devastating the consequences can be when that trust is shattered. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked anger and betrayal, and how, when pushed to the edge, the worst things can happen in the blink of an eye. If this story left you shaken, we want to hear your thoughts. Be sure to like this video and share your opinion in the comments below. And if you're new to our channel, subscribe for more stories that dig deep into the darkest corners of the human experience. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a chilling tale like this one. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay kind, and remember, love is fragile, and betrayal can lead down a path from which there's no return.